So hello and welcome everyone. My name is Michaela Johnson-Clayton and I am the program coordinator at the Ontario Land Trust Alliance, and I will be facilitating the session for us today. Just before we get started, I'm just going to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. I am going to ask that you please just mute your mics and turn off your video just for the presentation portion of the session. This just helps to limit any interference throughout the session and ensure that everything runs smoothly on our end. We have set aside some time for questions at the end of the session, so if you do have a question at that time, we ask that you please just either type your question in the chat box, or you can also use the raise hand function, which can be found at the bottom of your screen in reactions, and just raise your hand and we can call you up on the screen to ask your question in person if you prefer. We'll also ask that you please just log into the chat. So if you can please just sign in with your name and your organization that you're a part of. That would be great, and this just helps us gain a better idea of who all is attending our session today. And lastly, we will be recording today's session, just that we'll be able to share this with anyone who registered and was unable to attend the session today. So I'm just going to kick things off with a very quick overview of OLTA and local land trusts. Local land trusts across Ontario play an important role in preserving important private lands and raising awareness of the importance of land conservation. The Ontario Land Trust Alliance, established in 2002, is a registered charity that strengthens land conservation in Ontario by building and supporting a strong land trust movement. We are proud as an organization to represent such a diverse and dedicated group. We have land trusts represented all the way from north to Rainy Lake and Thunder Bay, east to Cornwall, and south to Windsor. Our members encompass 36 member land trusts and 11 associates and other conservation organizations. Together, they are protecting over 103,000 acres of ecologically significant lands, engaging thousands of supporters and volunteers annually, and playing a vital role in reaching Ontario's biodiversity and habitat conservation objectives. And with that, I would now like to introduce our presenter that we have for today, Alison Howson, who is the Executive Director here at the Ontario Land Trust Alliance. And with that, I will pass the floor over to Alison.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for all of you for joining us today. This session, for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting me, I'm Alison Howson, Executive Director of Ontario Land Trust Alliance. Ontario Land Trust Alliance is hosting this session, which is one of 3 being held over the next few days. There's a French language session tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, hosted by Mary-Lou Bordage. She's from Réseau de Milieux Naturels Protégés, which is the Quebec equivalent of Ontario Land Trust Alliance. And there is also another English session, which is hosted by Paul McNair from Land Trust Alliance of BC tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. These sessions will be broadly the same as this one. The intention is that we are providing opportunities for multiple sessions with different regional organizations. So the focus for this one is Ontario, but anybody who is not able to attend one of the other sessions is free to attend this one from other provinces as well. We welcome you to this session too, and the same applies for Ontario or other organizations attending the French language or English language sessions tomorrow. The purpose of the presentation today and this whole session is to share information and seek input from land trusts on the creation of a national land trust organization. Before we start though, I'd like to take a moment to share that our hearts are with everybody affected by the wretched but not wholly unexpected news of it, that for the moment, at least 1,300 unmarked graves discovered near sites from former residential schools. These are Indigenous lost children, and as Canadians, these are also our children. We support calls for action and will continue to support our Indigenous brothers and sisters in seeking opportunities to contribute to truth and reconciliation. Since we were unable to meet in person, I'd like to acknowledge that the land I'm situated on in Toronto is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and it is in the current territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit under Treaty 13, which was signed in 1805. For many thousands of years, Indigenous people have inhabited these lands, which are still home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We are grateful for the opportunity to gather on this territory and to work in this community. And we commit ourselves to the work of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Through this land acknowledgement, our intent is to honour and show gratitude to the original stewards of the land as a sign of respect and willingness to learn and to heal. We're mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. Together, we care for this land and each other, drawing on the strengths of our mutual history of nation building through peace and friendship, being mindful of generations to come. These sessions today and tomorrow focus on providing an update to you on the work of the Canadian Land Trust Working Group and the more recently formed National Organisation Working Group. So I'm going to provide a summary for you of the work that those organisations have been doing, and also a little bit of history, as far as I'm aware, of national organisations that have supported land trusts in the past. It's a relatively short presentation. We've allowed plenty of time for questions and discussions at the end of the presentation. And on the call with me today as well, there are other representatives from the National Organisation Working Group that I'm a member of, and also the Canadian Land Trust Working Group, which I'm also a member. We'll learn more about those organisations in a moment. And then after the presentation, I'd like to bring those members on screen and introduce each one for those that are available today. And you'll have a chance then to see some of the other faces behind this work. And myself and others can then provide perspectives from Ontario and other provinces and land trusts across the country. So I'm going to start now with a brief background and history of national land trust organisations in Canada. This has been developed with the Canadian Land Trust Working Group and the National Organisation Working Group based on our knowledge and experiences. So it's a brief summary. A lot of this work has happened prior to my time working with land trusts and even in fact being in Canada. But I have a little understanding of the organisations and how they work. And I know there are others on the call as well that can provide more background and details if you have more questions about historically what has happened in relation to national organisations in Canada in relation to land trust conservation. So there was a national organisation formed in 2006. That organisation was called the Canadian Land Trust Alliance. They were incorporated in 2006. And the organisation was managed by a volunteer board made up of representatives from each region of Canada. The CLTA mission was to promote private land conservation and strengthen the land trust movement nationally through communication, education, and the development of partnerships. One of the main roles for the CLTA in 2008 was to collaborate with the Land Trust Alliance in the US, who had recently at that time created standards and practices for the running of land trusts. And so the CLTA worked to create a Canadian version of those standards and practices. So those came into being in 2008. So we had at that point our first set of Canadian land trust standards and practices. CLTA was also involved in coordinating a number of national conferences, either independently or in partnership with other organisations. I know that Alta collaborated on 1 or 2 meetings with the CLTA while they were active. The CLTA became dormant in 2010. There were still a small number of board members sitting on the board, but the organisation itself wasn't active and wasn't undertaking any activities. After that, there was still an interest and across the country in there being some kind of national organization. So there were multiple discussions with different forums and different support about starting a new national organization or reinvigorating CLTA. And in 2015, a need for a new national organization was recognized, and the possible development of a new organization called Land Trust Canada was explored, with representation again from multiple land trust organizations and alliances from across Canada. What happened around that time, though, was the recognition in 2017 that there was an opportunity for Canadian land trusts to work together to create a unified voice to support the development of some federal funding. So in the historically, there had been a program called the Natural Areas Conservation Program, which was coordinated by the NCC, and there was a small element of funding from that fund that was going towards land trusts, but there wasn't a huge amount of uptake with those funds. So in 2015 and between 2015 and 17, there was a recognition that there was a need for some land trust, community land trust input to that proposal. So a new proposal for a new iteration of the NACP, which turned into the Natural Heritage Conservation Program, was developed then. And a working group of land trusts from across Canada at that point was then developed. And that was when the Canadian Land Trust Working Group came into being. So that happened in 2017. I'll talk a little bit more about the Canadian Land Trust Working Group in a moment. I'll just go through the timeline of activities that we have here first. So in 2018-19, the Canadian Land Trust Standards and Practices were revised, and NCC provided some support to the CLTA remaining board members at that point, and created a working group for the standards and practices. And then the standards and practices were revised and published in 2019. Following on from that work, there were some separate discussions about the creation of an organization to work on a performance standards program for land trusts. And so the Centre for Land Conservation was created in 2019. In 2020, there was a National Land Trust Forum in February. And participants from 37 land trusts across Canada came together for that meeting, including a representation as well from the 3 alliances. There are only 3 alliances that focus on an alliance role like Alter across Canada. So those 3 alliances were also in attendance at that meeting. It was clear from the discussions at that forum that there was significant interest in creating a new national organization supporting land trusts, and that would provide a voice for land trusts separate to a performance standards program. So the CLTA, that by which point had been working together for approximately 3 years, began working on what a national organization might look like. And then most recently, at the end of 2020, that working group created a separate national organization working group tasked with specific activities to to really think about what a national organization would look like. So now I'm going to go forward and talk a little bit more about those 2 working groups that I've mentioned. So, as I mentioned, the Canadian Land Trust Working Group was set up in 2017. It was a very informal group at the time, a group of land trusts and alliance representatives from across Canada Alter also did a call to request other volunteers to join the working group, and the intention of that working group was primarily to negotiate what the Natural Heritage Conservation Programme proposal would look like in collaboration with NCC. That worked very successfully, so the Natural Heritage Conservation Programme began at around that time, and the Canadian Land Trust Working Group has been working since then with WHC and NCC to deliver the Land Trust Conservation Fund, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, and some of you have received funding for. That program supports land securement for land trusts across the country. The Canadian Land Trust Working Group is comprised of leaders from land trusts and alliances across the country. You can see on the slide the logos of the organisations that are members of that working group. The working group is chaired by Justin Thompson from Southern Alberta Land Trust Society. And then we also have representatives, Jasper Lamont from the Nature Trust of British Columbia, Paul McNair, who is the Land Trust Alliance of British Columbia rep, myself, Susan Warmer from Ontario, from Oak Ridges Moraine Land Trust, and Bill Lougheed from Georgian Bay Land Trust. Bill is also a past Alter board treasurer and began working on the working group when he was on the board for Alter. And in addition, there is Mary Lou Bordage from Le Réseau du Milieu Naturel Protégé in Quebec, Megan Harris from Island Nature Trust in PEI, and Bonnie Sutherland from Nova Scotia Nature Trust. So as you can see, there's a good range of representation from across the country. Since 2015, there has been group discussion on development of or reinvigoration of a natural organisation, initially looking like Land Trust Canada, but then really morphing into the Land Trust, the Canadian Land Trust Working Group. The working group was initially primarily working on development of the Natural Heritage Conservation Programme proposal, and then once that was successful, working with Wildlife Habitat Canada to support delivery of the Land Trust Conservation Fund. And beyond that, we, as a group of an ad hoc group, we recognized as a group that there really is a need for us to be a more formal organization, or to transfer priorities into a more formal organization to really help strengthen our voice in those specific negotiations about funding for land trusts nationally, but also many other opportunities as well nationally, where at the moment we don't have a specific national voice. And while the alliances can play some role in discussions about national initiatives, we do have our mandates which are focused provincially. So at the moment there really is a gap in terms of providing a voice or delivery of support at that national level. So now I'm just going to briefly talk a bit about the National Organisation Working Group. So the Canadian Land Trust Working Group recognised that there was a need for further discussion about what a national organisation would look like. So in the second half of 2020, set up a separate working group to focus specifically on looking at what a national organisation might look like. So the National Organisation Working Group was set up, and the purpose of the working group was to identify and provide recommendations to the Canadian Land Trust Working Group on a general mandate for the new national organisation, possible administrative and governance structures for that organisation, and identify possible short and long-term funding mechanisms for that organisation. So this discussion today is part of that process. So this process is being led by the National Organisation Working Group, and we are have spent some time as a working group looking at what a national organisation might look like. So today we're going to be sharing what that organisation could look like, what the structure of it might be, what the primary activities may be, and what the funding model would be like, and then also what comes next. So this national organisation working group will provide recommendations back to the Canadian Land Trust Working Group, and then also to the alliances, and then the alliances and the working group will provide their own recommendations on the process developed so far, and then we'll move forward. If with support, we'll move forward with the development of a national organisation if there is community support for this development. So the members of the National Organisation Working Group are Renata Woodward, who's the chair. She's just leaving CEO-ship of the Nature Trust of New Brunswick, myself, Paul McNair from Land Trust Alliance of BC, Mary Lou from RMN in Quebec, and Greg Wickware, who is past chair of Haliburton Island Land Trust in Ontario. And we also are fortunate to have a small amount of funding available to us to support Denise Nichols, who is the admin coordinator for this working group. And she's been instrumental in supporting the creation of the spread of meeting materials and coordinating session development. So it's been really, really helpful to have Denise with us, and she, when she's not supporting this working group, is the marketing and event planning coordinator at the Land Trust Alliance in BC. So why are we talking about a national organisation again or now? Why is the time now rather than when the previous iterations haven't worked? Do we really want to be going through this process again? We, as a working group, both the Land Trust, the National Organisation Working Group and the Canadian Land Trust Working Group, feel very strongly that now is a really good time for us to be thinking and developing a new national organisation. The community has grown stronger. It has already some semblance of a voice in an ad hoc working group that's has representation across Canada, also has a good relationship with national organizations, and has been working with federal government in relation to other initiatives and the Land Trust and the Land Trust Conservation Fund. So now that we have a working group that has worked really well together and grown in strength and collaboration, we have now is the time when we have a strong established working relationships with land trusts across the country, and also with alliances across the country, with alliances working really closely together, sometimes informally on unfunded projects, but also we have a capacity building program that all of the alliances are working collaboratively on to build capacity for the land trust community. So all of these different pieces help us to see that there is real strength and opportunity now to create a new national organization. And if we formalize this relationship now, this will help us to support, to advocate for support for increased conservation. It will allow us to develop more collaborative leadership within the community of land trusts. We can grow and develop the capacity building and funding for that capacity building through a national organization, and there will be a much greater opportunity for us to advocate and communicate at a national level if we have a national organization that's focused on land conservation. So I'm coming now, Michaela, if I could ask you to post the poll. We have a few polls throughout the session today. I would ask if you could answer the poll if you feel comfortable answering yes or no. If you feel you can't answer yes or no and you would like to post a comment instead, please post a comment in the chat. We will be collating the poll information with the other session data, and then that information will be developed into a consultation report that we can then share with the participants. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to finish answering that poll. Okay. Excellent. All right, thank you. So now we'll move on. So now going to talk about the purposes of a national organization. The National Organization Working Group have worked together over the past 6 months or so to look at what the appropriate purposes for a national organization might be. These purposes have been developed in consultation with the Alliance boards and with consultation with the Canadian Land Trust Working Group. And through discussion, we've identified 6 key purposes for a national organisation. So these are to raise the profile of land trusts nationally, to provide national opportunities for partnerships, education and leadership, to build partnerships with federal government to help federal government achieve its national objectives, to strengthen governance and reduce risk within the land trust community, to secure funding for national initiatives, to ensure that that is done in a way that supports the Alliance and isn't in conflict with either the Alliance activities or individual land trust activities, and to develop national tools and initiatives that benefit land trust and partners. So Michaela, if I could ask you to pull up the next poll, and I'll leave the purposes on the screen while you do that. I appreciate that the purposes are coming to you right now and you don't have a chance to digest those particularly, but if we could have your initial thoughts on whether the purposes seem like a good fit for you for a national organization. Do you feel that there are any key purposes are missing, or any of them are you strongly feel are inappropriate? If you could post your comments in the chat if you are unhappy to provide a yes or no response.
Alison, it's Bill. I have a question. You have 2 questions on that poll, and if you can't answer that correctly, I don't believe
So the first part of the question is a yes/no question, and then the second part is a comments question. So if you have any additional comments, then those comments should go into the chat, please.
Oh, I see.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. We're getting lots of very positive responses, which is great. Thanks very much. And I look forward to looking at the chat comments with you as well. And as I said at the beginning, we'll go through any questions you have, or also any comment. If you have specific comments that you'd like to make about any of the slides, please either post them in the chat, or if you're comfortable doing so, you can ask them live to myself and other panel members at the end of the presentation. So I'll move on. So the next slide provides a summary of the suggested governance and responsibility structure for the organization. So what we're looking at is a national organization that will have a board of directors. The board of directors will include one representative from each of the Land Trust alliances, to ensure that the national organisation supports the work of existing alliance organisations and complements that work. And that also will ensure that the work of a national organisation will complement and support the work of land trusts as well. And in addition to those representatives, there will be individual representatives from land trusts. They may also potentially be linked with the alliances. It matters, they either will be or not, doesn't matter a huge amount, but we're looking for representatives from the land trust community, from BC, Ontario, Quebec, and then from the other broad regions that are not at the moment represented by the alliances. There is currently no alliance in the Prairie provinces or in the Atlantic provinces. So it's essential that we have representatives from those provinces as well. And it will be the responsibility of the Prairie Land Trust organisations and the Atlantic Land Trust organisations to decide between themselves who would be the most appropriate representative to sit on the board for the national organisation. So the intention of the national organisation is that the national organisation would also support development of working groups. The first working group is a working group that's effectively already in existence. So the Canadian Land Trust Working Group would move over to a national funding working group. And so the focus for that working group would continue to be, but solely be on the focus of national funding support. And at the moment, that focus will be on the next iteration of the Natural Heritage Conservation Programme, working with Ducks and NCC and WHC on that development. The national organisation will, once it's set up, the aim would be for the organisation to work very closely with the federal government and then other national partners. The list provided here is just some examples of the organisations that would be important partners for a national land trust organisation. So Wildlife Habitat Canada, Centre for Land Conservation, NCC, Nature Conservative Canada, DUG, and other national organisations as well, who potentially would be important partners. There also would be, as I mentioned, a very close working relationship with the existing alliance organisations to ensure that the national organisation works collaboratively with the alliances and not in conflict. And it's also important for the national organisation to work and support relationship building and collaboration with Indigenous land trusts as those come into development, into existence. There are some Indigenous land trusts in development already, and so it's essential that the national organisation would also represent those organisations too. So that's why that is included there. So the next poll is, as a governance model, do you support the community up approach where alliances and representative land trusts become the stakeholders of the national body to respond to collective federal issues? Again, I'll go back to the previous slide so you can see the governance model. I appreciate again that you haven't had a huge amount of time to digest this information, and certainly the slides and the presentations will be available after this session. So if you have an opportunity, you can review those at your leisure and provide any additional comments or thoughts. We'll provide an opportunity for you to provide feedback after the session if you would like more time to digest the contents. I'll give you a couple of minutes just to finish responding to that poll. Thank you. Great. Again, very positive feedback from that poll as well, which is fantastic. So I'm going to move on now to proposed activities that the working group has looked at and is recommending as initial priorities for a national organisation. The working group is already looking at the development of a business plan to allow the organisation to have a clear direction and a clear business focus for the next 1 to 5 years. It's really important, given the history of other organisations nationally, that we identify and have confidence that we can source funding to run and develop the growth of a national organisation. We anticipate that obviously at the beginning the organisation would be very small. The expectation is there would probably only be a part-time staff person initially, but their role would then be to develop a strategic plan for the organisation and to secure funding for national organisation operations. So the priority focus for that individual and for the board would be also then to build national relationships, provide opportunities to advocate for land trust or provide responses to national policy input and other advocacy, like the Green Budget Coalition, for example. That's a group of environmental organisations, and at the moment the land trusts do not really have a voice there because there's no national organisation to provide that advocacy, and we effectively are relying on DUC and NCC to provide that advocacy on our behalf. And the final one is something that is already happening with the Canadian Land Trust Working Group to work on continuing to secure funding for the land trust community from the Natural Heritage Conservation Programme. So that also would be a key priority for a new national organisation. So I think we then have another poll. Yes, so if you could launch the poll, Michaela, and I'll leave the proposed activities up again. So the poll is, do you agree with the proposed priorities of a national organisation? Again, if you have any questions or comments, please post those in the chat. Okay, it looks like the majority of you have voted. Again, very positive response, which is fantastic. I'll move on to the next slide. Before we get to the end, I'll just talk a little bit briefly a little bit about funding strategy for the organisation. So the goal of our funding strategy is to provide for a sustainable national organisation. I think as a working group, we're acutely aware that if we want to create a national organisation, we want a national organisation that can develop and grow, and an organisation that doesn't come into existence for a couple of years and then become dormant, or for lack of funding isn't able to continue as an organisation. So we're looking at how we might secure funding for operations and programs of a national organisation. As I mentioned, the time is really good for us in relation to this specific piece, because we already have alliances working together on funded project activities, and so those project activities, some elements of those activities could be taken up by the national organisation. In addition, if we're looking to advocate and secure funding for land trusts, the Natural Heritage Conservation Programme is something that is likely to be ongoing and developing new proposals alongside other national conservation organisations like DUC and NTC. The opportunity is there, and that's something that the national organisation could potentially take a lead on, rather than the current position that we have at the moment, where there is a lot of volunteer hours going into supporting the Land Trust Conservation Fund, because we don't have a formal organisation where administration costs could be allocated to an organisation. So there is for sure a really good opportunity there in terms of potential funding, at least in the short term, for a part of the role of a national organisation. And as I also mentioned, we started looking at the development of a business plan. We have, as I mentioned, some funding, a small amount of funding already to support the administration of the working group. There is an opportunity as well to secure funding, a small amount of startup funding through each of the alliances to help with the initial startup of an organization. And we also have a capacity building program that could also help to support the development of a national organization in the short term. We are also looking at the development of the business plan and creation of programs with alliance partnerships. So because we're doing this in a very collaborative way within the alliances, then we'll be beginning to move activities that some of the alliances have been working on, which is a more national, into activities that the national organization would do. So those activities are already happening. And if they can then be moved into a national organization role, there is opportunity and strength there in development of a funding strategy already. So it gives me confidence that a national organization is more likely to succeed, because we have some existing funds available. We have existing program potential available, that there's specific roles that the national organization could take on. And we are also, as a working group, working to develop a broad funding strategy as part of the business plan, and then that will be moved over into the development of the strategic plan once we have a staff person to do that. So the next steps. So all of this discussion has happened by voluntary working groups who have been putting time into thinking about what a national organization might look like. We are coming to you today and tomorrow to share where we have come to and our thoughts and ideas about what a national organization could be. And we're really interested in hearing from you, your thoughts and ideas and feedback, whether you think we're going in the right direction, whether you think it's not really going to work for you as an organization. If you have questions about how land trusts, local land trusts would fit into a national organization's work, those types of things, we will get the other working group members as well on screen in a few minutes, and we can field questions and comments from you on that. So we will be listening to what you have to say and collating that information together with the sessions and feedback from the sessions tomorrow as well. Then that information will be developed into some recommendations, which will go back to the Canadian Land Trust Working Group and to the Alliance boards for review. At that point, if the alliances are comfortable moving forward, then those organizations that are part of alliances will have an opportunity to later in the year to approve the process, that's certainly something that we would be doing at Ultra, and that would probably happen at the Ontario Land Trust Alliance gathering. Then if we do have community support, then we would be looking at finalising a plan for the creation of a national organisation, then also providing some outreach to potential national partners about what our plans and process are, developing strategy for startup funding, and then all of the standard processes that we would need to go to set up a new organisation. So applying for charitable status, establishing board of directors, etc., hiring a staff person, so all of those activities. In addition, the alliances have been working together on the beginnings of a plan for a national conference, which would likely occur in in the fall of 2022. So that's where we are right now. That's the end of the slides. So if I could ask that anyone who is from the Canadian Land Trust working group or the National Organisation working group now start your video, and I'll introduce you, and then we can open up the floor for questions. And I'm going to stop sharing this presentation for now. I'll just begin with a screen in order that I can see you. So we have Mary-Lou Bordage, who is from RMN in Quebec. She is my compatriot in Quebec, and she sits on the Canadian Land Trust Working Group and has done since its inception, and she also sits on the National Organisation Working Group. We also have Bill Lougheed from Georgian Bay Land Trust, and Bill is on the Canadian Land Trust Working Group and also sits on the Management Committee for the Land Trust Conservation Fund. We also have Renata Woodward from Niche Trust of New Brunswick. She's the chair of the National Organisation Working Group and has also historically worked on potential development of a new national organisation since goodness knows when, but 2015 at least. We have Denise Nichols, who is an administrator for the National Organisation Working Group from BC. Thanks, Denise. And Greg Wickware, who was past chair from Halliburton's Highlands Land Trust, and he also sits on the National Organisation Working Group. And we also have Paul McNair, who is my compatriot from the Land Trust Alliance in BC. Is there anybody else from any of the working groups on the call that I haven't introduced yet? I don't see anybody, but I may have missed somebody. Okay, or anyone that's only been able to call in, so I won't be able to see who you are. Okay, that's everybody. Okay, all right then let's open up the floor for questions. So if anyone has any questions about the presentation today, please go ahead. Michaela, if I could ask you to let us know if there's questions in the chat.
Yeah, so we did have a question. This relates back to the purposes of the national organization. I'm just asking what national activities might be undertaken and if you could give some examples.
Yes, okay, thank you. That's a great question. So just to begin with, because the organization is fledgling, we are expecting that we would keep the purposes as tight as we can. We're likely to have a part-time staff person and a board that will be represented by land trusts who are also potentially leaders in other organizations as well. So our capacity will be small to begin with. So the focus will be on developing partnerships with existing national organizations that potentially could support the land trust community, focusing on building partnerships with the federal government. The working group, as I mentioned, has a good relationship already there, so that needs to grow. I know there are opportunities for achieving national objectives, like nature-based climate solutions, as well as the current Natural Heritage Conservation Program, which we'll be working towards as well. The alliances have a capacity building program. So what we'll probably be looking at is how that capacity building program could be created. So it's led nationally, but then filters down into the provinces and to other land trusts as needed. So those are the types of activities that we're most likely going to be focused on initially. If anybody else would like to chime in, please do.
Maybe I'll just chime in and bring up, become the advocacy body for Canadian Land Trust on federal level. We all can do our work on provincial and regional levels, but often don't have the capacity for national level. So this organization will really take that role on behalf of land trusts.
Thanks, Renata. Michaela, do we have another question?
Yeah, I see that John has his hand raised. John, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you, John Pierce from American Friends. I just want to emphasize that I think you need to lay out a connection to the Indigenous community right off the bat. You may not have the connection in place, but I would suggest that you put a place marker on the board for an Indigenous representative. Certainly the way things are happening in BC, it's essential if you want to get ahead politically. There's usually money to support it, and would imagine the same thing is true at the federal level.
Yeah, that's a really great comment, John. We certainly did have a significant discussion about that. We decided at this point to have the board of directors as they are, but it may be that one of the representatives provincially could be from an Indigenous community. So we want to make sure that we are open to that for within a national organization. We also have to think about what that would, how that would work and what the role of the national organization would be. So we need to make sure that we have openness and an opportunity for Indigenous communities and those working in land conservation to be part of the discussions around the development of a national organization and the running of a national organization. And at the moment, I think I think I would be fair to say on behalf of the committee, on behalf of the working group, that we weren't sure quite what that would look like. And we wanted to make sure that we weren't just being tokenistic and saying, okay, yeah, there'll be a spot for Indigenous person, because the needs of Indigenous communities are going to be so different across Canada that we have to think about and really collaborate and develop those relationships so that they're led by the Indigenous peoples rather than being directed by us. Anyone else want to add anything to that? Okay. Next question.
Yeah, there's another question in the chat here asking, is the proposed national organization going to deliver the accreditation program, which is partially underway?
That's a good question at the moment, because we are in discussion about the creation of a national organization. We haven't had that conversation with CLC yet. CLC is obviously an existing organization and is looking at initiatives around performance standards. So once the organization is created, if that's the way that we're going, then we'll have those conversations with CLC and collaborate with them, and if necessary, and we can figure out then, we'll figure out then whether it makes sense for that work to come into the national organization, or whether it makes sense for it to stay separate.
Okay, I do have another question / comment here from Sheila, saying it all sounds good, but I'm a little nervous about yet another charity or organization looking for scarce conservation funding and how this would affect fundraising efforts for local land trusts.
That's a great question. It's been top of all our minds when thinking about what a national organization would look like, that the purpose for the national organization that would be an overall benefit to the land trust community. And so we have thought about what that structure would look like, and ensuring the structure would provide the intention for a national organization would be to increase opportunities for individual land trusts rather than decreasing those opportunities. Obviously, there is going to be a need for the development of fund development strategy for the organization to make sure the organization is stable, but the intent would be and it has always been that we think that a national organization is valuable because it will increase the visual nature of land trusts nationally. It will allow increased advocacy at a national level. It will, the intention is really for the national organization to be that national voice and help us as individual organizations grow stronger. So we'll be looking for ways to increase that funding and finding ways for that funding to be going directly to those land trusts, not to be held by a national organization. We're not looking to create a national organization that is larger and cumbersome. It probably will remain relatively small. And the funding will be then directed potentially through the national organization where we need to have a national focus, but that the monies will be then drawing down into the alliances and to the land trusts.
Alison, it's Bill here. Maybe I can add.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
I mean, I think the Canadian Land Trust Working Group, the model that it's developed, which is all volunteer, we've been 4 years into it, and we increased the OQO program, from a mere 5 million to 20 million. And we're striving for even more next time. So that's a real net increase in funding for land trusts across the country, all done by a volunteer group. And this national body, the idea is to have it lean and mean, as far as I understand it, and to be delivering programs like that and more of them. So this is not and the model is not, as I understand it, one where you're going to have to pay fees to a national body. We're looking at I gather there's different funding models looking at big foundations and corporations to fund the national body. Mm-hmm. And, that's one lead individual, I think, plus a volunteer board working to get that kind of funding structure in place so it doesn't fall down like prior attempts have. So I think the proof is in the pudding already in terms of the $20 million we delivered in the NHCP program.
That's very helpful. Thanks, Bill. Did whoever posted that question have any follow-up comments or questions? Okay. Do you have other questions from the chat, Michaela?
Yep, there's one more in here. This is from Heather Berna. Having been part of the steering committee for the formation of CLTA, I feel that the opportunities and needs for a national organization were voiced very similarly then as now. What key actions do you feel are needed for this kick at the can to be more resilient?
That's a really good question. I think the relationship with the federal funding program as we have it right now, the Land Trust Conservation Fund, as Bill mentioned, has grown significantly, and there is opportunity there for a national organization to act in that administrative role or part of that administrative role. So there is already a potentially significant funding program that could provide some support, as again, as Bill mentioned, to a lean, mean organization to help see a future direction. So one of the key roles for the organization could be ensuring that federal funding continues through the volunteer working group that has been running already and is existence, and is and I think in addition, the Canadian Land Trust Working Group has been working together voluntarily for at least 4 years and has grown in strength. So there is a lot of trust between the alliance organizations that wasn't there a few years ago for sure. And I can't speak to at the time of CLTA. And also there's a lot of trust between land trusts from different provinces as well, working really close together for key priorities and seeing where the opportunities are, and really striving with a laser focus to get the best from those programs for the land trust community. So that enthusiasm and that commitment is what makes a difference to me personally. I'll be interested to hear from others on the working groups as well as to their thoughts.
I agree with Alison, and also I think just the united voice that happened at the CLC meeting in February really showed that land trust, prior jumping into full accreditation program in Canada, it is important to provide land trusts with learning opportunities, capacity building, and funding opportunities. And we are hoping that this organization can fill that gap.
That's great. Thanks, Renata. Are there any other questions in the chat?
There are. I see that we're a few minutes past 2. Are we still good to continue for those who want to stick around?
That's a great point. So maybe if we can stay on for another 5 minutes for anyone who is able to. And if you have to leave for another meeting, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And yeah, and we'll continue to communicate with you about the next steps and the outcome of these communication sessions. Okay, so go ahead, Michaela.
Awesome. So we have a question here from John. He said, this is a great initiative and there's a definite need for a national body. On the governance side, are you envisioning individual land trusts being members who elect the board?
Oh, that's a good question. At the moment, we are intending that there will not be an individual membership structure, because we are aware that we do not want to be in the position where we're requiring individual land trusts to pay for membership for multiple organizations. what the longer term structure of the organization would look like will be obviously determined as the organization grows. But for now, we as a working group are keen to avoid the paid membership model. So we'll be seeking funding from external sources rather than trying to fund the operation of the organization through membership. I think there was also a question, I didn't quite see where it was, about the alliances, and something that we did have discussed when we were discussing the structure, that at the moment we have 3 alliances, and in future there may be an interest in developing other alliances in other regions or provinces. And should that happen, then we would be anticipating that that alliance would then have a separate representation on the national organization as well, to, so that we are being fair and equitable about that process. And also ensuring that if there isn't any other alliance formation, then the individual regions would still have some representation on the board.
I have one last question in the chat, and then I see that John also has his hand raised. So I'll ask you the chat question, and then we can address John's question afterwards. So this question's from Steve. He's asking, what is the time window for consultation input, and what is the anticipated timing of report to CLT, to the Canadian Land Trust Working Group, in their decision?
That's a great question. So we're having these consultation sessions this week, and then there will be, maybe within a month, there will be a summary report provided to the working group and to the alliances, summarizing the findings of these sessions and the outlined recommendations. Then following that, there will be a need for the alliance organizations to consult directly with their membership and potentially specifically asking the question whether an organization, national organization, would be supported by the alliance members. So that would happen in the fall. And then if that all is moving forward in a positive way towards the development of national organization, then we would be looking at the new organization moving forward with the next steps to incorporating a national organization in the early spring of next year. That's how I see it. If anyone has any other thoughts on that, please share. Okay, Michaela, did you, sorry, John, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, thanks, Allison. I can certainly understand the desire not to have another paid membership for Land Trust to pony up. That's admirable. But what's going to be the structure of the membership of the organization? That is to say, who does elect the board?
And that's a great question. And I think it's something that we need to continue to discuss and figure out whether we have some kind of trustee system instead, or whether we have membership, but it's not paid membership, so that the Land Trust would still have the opportunity to vote on an election of the board. Initially, I think the board would be created from the volunteers as we have that structure. The intention is that because we want to make sure that the alliances have a strong role in the organization, that there would always be a representative from the 3 alliances, and but we would also need to have representatives from the other provinces. We would need to figure out how those roles were each in turn voted in. Anyone else have any other comment to add?
Now, I can certainly see having seats assigned to the regional alliances. And in the same way, I think having a seat assigned to an indigenous interest yet to be defined would be a good step. And then how you broaden it out to the other groups, I'm not quite so sure, but somehow do so.
Mhm. I think that's a great question, and I think that's something that we need to look at in more detail, figure out how we make that process as transparent as possible.
And John, if you or anybody here has some recommendations on the indigenous piece, it would be welcome, because we greatly discussed this matter, but it is quite complicated to work on it on a national level, because many indigenous groups are very local and regional. We understand that there is a initiative that is going on right now for the indigenous reconciliation with NCC and other organizations. So maybe we are hoping we would become part of that, but please, any recommendations, don't feel afraid to send it to us. We would greatly appreciate that.
I don't have the experience to make recommendations. My main point is, I think you need to signal that there's a place open for it once you can find the right connection. And
Yeah.
finding national leaders to that community is a challenge.
Yeah, there is a Conservation Through Reconciliation partnership, and they have recently set up Indigenous Land Trust Circle. And so I think that would probably be a really good starting place for us to communicate with them, let them know what we're thinking in terms of a national organization, and see whether there are some opportunities there to work together, or for them to help guide us in the best approach and the best way forward. Bill, you have your hand up. Do you want to go?
Sure. The indigenous land committees across the country, I think their lands committees, they elect certain members, and it's probably that aspect that you would want a board position coming from. So they're already organized in terms of control of their lands, and those individuals have knowledge about indigenous conservation. So that's maybe something you might consider.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Bill. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there. We have one final poll, I think, Michaela. So can you post that for us, and then we'll say thanks. So our final question, if you're in support of creating a land trust organization, again, if you're happy to post your answer in the poll, please do. If you have comments on the question, then please post them in the chat. Thank you again for taking the time to be with us today, and to hear about the work that we've been doing, and to provide your thoughts and feedback. It's really been extremely helpful to us, and we'll be taking your comments and reviewing the comments from the chat, and also from the recordings, to help us with addressing where there may be challenges, and where there are comments on other recommendations that we might be making. And we will be then taking forward the next steps as outlined on our slide. And we'll be going from there. So you'll hear more from us in the coming months. So thank you, everybody, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.